Captain Midnight.
So, there was a tweet going around recently that was pretty standard fare. It asked us which DreamWorks franchise we'd delete if we had to, with the options being Shrek, Madagascar, How to Train Your Dragon, and Kung Fu Panda. Now, I won't tell you where I fall here. Well, okay, well, it's Madagascar, but that's not why I'm telling you this. Looking at that tweet, I realized just how many movies these franchises represent. CG animated film after CG animated film. This is what DreamWorks Animation has been for the vast majority of its history now. And I'm not here to say that's a bad thing. At least not always. I like some of these movies a lot. But there's one animated DreamWorks film I've always been fascinated by. One movie that, had it been a bigger hit, could have set the studio on a completely different trajectory. And one that, even aside from all of that, I think is worth celebrating in its own right. Before I get into it, thank you to everyone who subscribed last week. Oh, and I do have a new podcast. Stay tuned till the end of the video to hear all about that.
And if you're one of the first to buy the Prince of Egypt video, you'll get a beanbag camel absolutely free.
Alright, so The Prince of Egypt. Looking back on this 1998 movie now, it feels pretty wild that it exists at all. It adapts a story important to multiple religions throughout the world, and is living in the shadow of one of the most iconic and impactful classic Hollywood films of all time, The Ten Commandments. That was a pretty daunting task. When it comes to early DreamWorks animation, it has to be acknowledged that both The Prince of Egypt and Shrek came about in very different ways as a response to DreamWorks co-founder Jeffrey Katzenberg's very public feud with his former studio, Disney. With Shrek, I think it's pretty obvious how, with much of the satire being aimed at Disney's classic story elements. With Prince of Egypt, though, it came from a desire to make the kind of animated films he felt he couldn't at Disney. According to Katzenberg, he had a conversation with Steven Spielberg about his desire to make a huge animated epic, not just aimed at kids, something in the vein of The Terminator or Indiana Jones. This prompted Spielberg to tell him, "Good, you ought to do the Ten Commandments." Now, that may seem like a strange connection for him to make with those other two, but you have to remember, Spielberg was born in 1946. Like, this man is an original, accept no substitutes baby boomer. Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments came out when he was 10 years old. And if you've seen his autobiographical film, The Fabelmans, you can probably imagine how much of an impact a Hollywood epic on that scale really had on him at the time. To Spielberg's credit though, it's not like he was beholden to the studio remaking the 1956 version at all. It was apparently his idea to forefront the crumbling brotherhood bond between Moses and Ramesses, a very different take on the material. According to songwriter Steven Schwartz, quote, "The film was always conceived, from the moment Steven Spielberg said that this is what we should do, as a brother story. It was Steven who said he wanted it told as the story of these two young men who grow up together, who love each other, two young men of privilege, and then their destinies take them in the direction where they become antagonists. A can their love overcome that kind of thing. That's one way that Prince of Egypt separates itself from DeMille's film, but its most notable is probably the running time, a choice made by directors Brenda Chapman, Steve Hickner, and Simon Wells. The Ten Commandments, like many 50s costume epics, is not exactly fast-paced, coming in at around 3 hours and 40 minutes long. The Prince of Egypt goes for the exact opposite. Until rewatching it, I had actually forgotten just how short it is. An hour 40, like basically 90 minutes on the dot without credits. I do think there were some downsides to that, but overall, the movie is just really propulsive. It moves at a breakneck pace in a genre, biblical epics, which are not exactly known for that. The opening of The Prince of Egypt does a great job of setting the tone and stakes as quickly as possible. We're introduced to the plight of the Hebrew slaves in Egypt with the song Deliver Us. Now this is pretty strange to see in the context of the DreamWorks that we would come to know later, because for a family film, they really aren't pulling any punches here. We see babies being torn from their mothers, workers collapsing under the weight of their labor. I remember finding this pretty viscerally upsetting as a kid. Not at all what I was used to from most other animated movies I had on VHS. It is a family film, but it has to balance that with the darker aspects of its source material. And I think that balance is the key to what makes The Prince of Egypt feel unique, at least in the context of DreamWorks. It's a film that respects its audience, regardless of age, and trusts them to grapple with what ends up being some pretty heavy subject matter. For a while after that, though, it's kind of all fun and games. We're thrust into the life of Moses, who's raised as a prince of Egypt alongside his adoptive brother Ramesses. These scenes do a fantastic job of humanizing both characters before their paths really diverge, which again is no small feat considering how quickly the story has to get moving. Moses, voiced by the late great Val Kilmer, is the carefree brother, charismatic, restless, and completely unconcerned with consequences, just being so sure of his own place in the world. The movie does a great job of contrasting him with Ramesses, voiced by Ralph Fiennes, who clearly wants to be just as immature, but carries the weight of his father's expectations as the future pharaoh. That father is played by Patrick Stewart, lending that authoritative Starfleet captain voice to a character that honestly only has a few scenes, but whose malevolent presence lingers over Moses and Ramesses' entire relationship. He has a profound impact on both of them. For Moses, it's the way that he's able to just casually toss off the deaths of an untold number of children. That's a real breaking point for a young man who, up until then, had turned a blind eye to the casually brutal world around him. And to Ramesses, he imparted a fear of ever being the weak link, the one who shatters everything that their family had amassed and controlled over generations of rule. By the time Moses returns to the city from his self-imposed exile, Stewart's pharaoh is dead and buried, but his impact informs everything his sons do going forward. I will say, I think it's the relationships between the brothers and then Moses and God that truly elevate the film. Like, don't get me wrong, there is a solid supporting cast here. Like Michelle Pfeiffer's Zipporah, who gets two separate, very well executed introductions, but mostly spends the back half of the movie just kinda standing around and reacting to things. Sandra Bullock and Jeff Goldblum play Miriam and Aaron, Moses' siblings, who are fantastic in the moments we actually see them, but they don't really get much screen time devoted to their lives at all. I think Aaron is one of the most interesting characters in the actual book of Exodus, a figure as flawed and as fascinating as Moses himself, so I can't help but think that's a missed opportunity. But Prince of Egypt makes the choice to just stay highly focused, and I think that was probably the right one. The movie is just packed with great musical sequences. I know some people can't stand the two court magicians played by Steve Martin and Martin Short, and I gotta be honest, I don't get it. Like, I love these guys. They strike just the right chord between over-the-top cartoonishness and believably creepy malice. Their song, Playing with the Big Boys, is probably not one I'd throw on in just about any other context, but I think it's so well animated. Watching the shadow play of Moses' snake devouring theirs whole is one of the most striking images in the entire movie. But at least to me, there's really two just absolute showstoppers here. All I Ever Wanted, which sees Moses trying to assure himself among his graceful rooms of alabaster stone that he's exactly where he should be, before the number descends into a hieroglyphic nightmare, where Moses is chased by soldiers and then witnesses the death of Hebrew children. Again, this is pretty heady territory for a movie like this, and I think they do a great job of presenting it in a way that's both really novel and well animated, but also abstracted enough that it doesn't feel completely out of sync with the rest of the film, despite the subject matter. Also, Moses' singing voice, Mick Byram, just nails this conflict between the character's blustering but fragile ego and his fear of the truth that's just under the surface. I swear, I click on this scene every time it pops up in my suggested videos, and that happens a lot, obviously, because I click on it every time. Now, the other number is The Plagues, which is this expansive reprise of All I Ever Wanted. This sequence wears its musical theater influence on its sleeve, even climaxing with our leads singing angrily at each other in different color spotlights. But that's combined with some absolutely stellar animation, depicting one of the most infamous scenes in Exodus. The stubbornness and betrayal felt by Ramesses, the resigned sorrow of Moses, so much is conveyed so quickly. Now, this is immediately followed up with what is maybe the most upsetting scene ever put in one of these large-scale American studio animated films. The death of the firstborn. Now these days, a DreamWorks movie would not touch something like this with a 10-foot pole. And I am kind of shocked they didn't sand down the edges of the story of Exodus a bit for a mass audience. I scrolled through the user-written IMDb reviews for the movie a few days ago, and yeah, there you will find some people who thought this sequence was so upsetting that they negatively reviewed the entire film. And on some level, I do understand that. The image of the kid's arm in the doorway is one that has stuck with me for years. I was raised in a pretty religious home. I watched a lot of VeggieTales in my day, and yeah, this was not that. I will say I think the movie handles its depiction of the god of Exodus with a lot of care. The voice Moses hears as God is his own, which I think is an interesting artistic choice. And he's introduced in the really memorable Burning Bush sequence, which establishes his presence through a great little piece of Hans Zimmer music that recurs throughout the film. His mercy, anger, love, and wrath, it's all there, and the movie doesn't really make any attempt to downplay it. Sorry to make this about me, but since the release of that Minecraft video, I've been told again and again that it's only right for our expectations for family entertainment to just be the most inoffensive stuff possible. And while I understand this movie won't be for everyone, I respect the Prince of Egypt for sticking with such a bold choice. Now, I've been pretty effusive about the back half of the film, so let me bring up one mild critique. I don't think the movie quite nails this transition between the heaviness of those deaths to the uplifting when you believe. Here's the thing, the movie's lone Oscar comes from this song, a Starfuel duet with Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston. And I don't know, I've always felt it seemed a little out of place. Basically, all the other songs reflect where one or two of the characters are at emotionally. They're very character-driven. When You Believe just feels like a broad ballad set aside for two pop stars to sing, and it would kind of work in just about any context. And hey, I guess it got the result they were looking for. But I would have appreciated a song a little more grounded in character, maybe something for Miriam and Aaron, who are finally being freed for the first time after years of hoping their brother still cared about them. There's also the fact that I think the ballad is just very dated in its production style in a way that the rest of the movie isn't. Speaking of its production, let's finally talk about that animation more. Now, this would be a very easy video for me to go on and on about how much I miss old school 2D animation in big films like this. And yeah, that's true, but the magic of the movie lies in how it blends 2D and early 3D animation in such interesting ways. I absolutely love the Red Sea sequence for this reason, showing what these two forms can accomplish together on a budgetary scale that we rarely see from 2D animation anymore, especially outside of Japan. And I do think it manages to stack up well against the Ten Commandments similar scene, one of the most famous special effects in that era of Hollywood. In Prince of Egypt, it's just so massive and awe-inspiring. I absolutely love the shadow of that whale deep in the water, it's just so good. And I like that the triumph of the moment is ultimately undercut by Moses looking out over the sea, his brother screaming in anger. Ramesses surviving is a bit odd, and I've always kind of wondered if it's mostly in Moses' head, but I also think there's something fitting about this. It's his worst nightmare come true. Ultimately, he was the weak link, something that he could have prevented from the start. The film ends with Moses coming down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments. It's all framed very triumphantly. If you know the story of Exodus, you'll be well aware that actually things were about to get very, very bad for our little gang here. And I've often wondered what a version of this film that just kept going would look like, where we see more of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. I think that would have been fascinating, but it's just not the story they were looking to tell here, and I think this is a pretty understandable way to wrap things up. I would say The Prince of Egypt was received politely when it came out in 1998. Neither a massive hit nor a flop. The reviews were good, but not amazing. I think it deserved better, but that's also much easier to say in hindsight. Shrek would arrive a few years later and change the trajectory of DreamWorks forever. I'm not gonna complain about that too much, but I think it's worth looking back at this movie, because so much of what it attempted, both in terms of its visual style and its heavy subject matter, just wouldn't look anything like this today. It's worth remembering what they were reaching for, and the fact that I think for the most part, they succeeded. So that's The Prince of Egypt. You know, speaking of amazing things from 1998, did you know that I have an almost 30-minute long podcast where I dive into the upcoming Buffy the Vampire Slayer revival on Hulu? I discuss its potential strengths, possible pitfalls, and the challenges left by both its finale and Angel's final season. It's called Midnight Musings, and I'm really excited to keep recording these. Like later this month, I'm going to be talking about why I think Madden franchise mode desperately needs to learn a thing or two from the Fire Emblem series. That's available alongside all my videos on Nebula, which I think is the ideal platform for exploring topics that I can't usually cover, and where all of my videos are totally ad-free. Nebula is the home to creators like Man Carrying Thing, Lindsay Ellis, and Hello Future Me, making it the boutique streaming service for unique projects. Jetlag, the really creative travel competition show, just announced a 2-part special set across New York City, so there's really never been a better time to get aboard. Right now, you can join Nebula with an amazing deal, 40% off a yearly subscription, so just $36 a year, or about $3 a month. Plus, you'll get guest passes to share a week of access with friends or family. To sign up, visit go.nebula.tv/captainmidnight or just scan the QR code on screen. You can also find that link in the description or pinned comment below.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.